Chapter 3-4. I could easily remember the full extent of the legend behind Nennius of Britannia and the battle for Londinium. The sheer brutality and combat prowess displayed by the heavily wounded Briton after being defeated by Julius Caesar were nothing short of legendary. The highly detailed kill count after receiving that fatal injury to his head that was forwarded by Geoffrey of Monmouth made it clear that whatever had happened in that fight, it was somehow connected to the blade that was now mine to use. Crocia-Mors was immensely powerful even after so many years of inactivity. I remember that when Altuas first looked at it, he had almost vibrated at the chance of studying the peculiar sword, whispering furiously and swiftly over the various effects that the runes impressed upon the metal were giving to the renowned weapon. All of it was the result of masterful work from the old magecraft available only to the most powerful members of the Roman Empire, which became a lovely attachment to Caesar's innate capacity to win victory through his intelligence. Yet what truly got me hooked over this lucky discovery was how it exactly worked and why I had to make sure that this sword would always remain under my control. Once it had bonded with its wielder, Crocia-Mors would give them the power to obtain victory upon close-ranged fights in any circumstance. Yep, I was holding the first ever aimbot ever created and I wasn't feeling even a glimpse of shame of keeping it around. Of course I had to put it away while training with Marcus, as we were both quick to notice that I couldn't just be beaten while I was holding the sword. Not even in the unfairness of a 1-against-4 spar I came ever close to face defeat against my opponent, surprising the soldiers that had been mustered for the task. I was incredibly quick, my reaction time was absurdly synchronized with my pace, and I could barely feel winded even after numerous spars of various difficulty. It was good news, because it offered me the edge over personal fights with any opponent, but I was well aware that trusting too much the blade for my successes would be a quick way to fall against some lucky opponent. Caesar did lose it while battling against Nennius, but while the famous Roman general had plenty of experience to still be a skilled fighter without Crocia-Mors, I was still someone that trusted his combat ability upon years spent playing video games and playing with sticks back in my childhood. Plus, a well-aimed arrow could easily kill me even while holding such a powerful artifact. But I couldn't help but also worry about the fact that Excalibur was now a possibility since Crocia-Mors was now there, and I was frightened by the prospect of fighting the current holder of such blade, either King Arthur himself or one of the various people that share the name with him. I mean, if Crocia-Mors was this strong, God knows how much stronger Excalibur would be, and that is without considering other weapons like Caliban, Calidbolg, Rongaminiad, and Gibalg. If these blades were actually lingering around, then things were surely going to become quite interesting if not panic-inducing for me. The first spar without the weapon proved to be a good proof to solidify my worries over the matter, with the commander steamrolling me without much effort. My build was slim and with some signs of muscles in some places, but I wasn't still fit enough to manage myself into a fight. Which was a big bad, considering that this era saw more actions for kings and I was meant to lead charges into the enemy in case of serious fair battles. Honor was a thing, but not to the same degree known only to Got Starks, and I had to keep myself afloat in the continuous political challenge of my position with a mix of good words and proper successes under my belt. Which is why training in both swordsmanship and magecraft proved to be the best choice of action for the time being, as the preparation for my planned traps continued smoothly thanks to the help of some peasants loyal to the castle. Felicianus had politely accepted the new burden I'd decided to bestow to the priests working at the church, giving them the humble task of setting some rudimentary soup kitchens by some of the unoccupied buildings of the little city. It had been quite awkward to explain what exactly a soup kitchen was and why it was important to feed those that were now without work and home, but the results were in fact showing in the form of the little engineer corps I've managed to create in so little time. For now, it was just a dozen of well-built men with some basic understanding of craftsmanship that would be used as the backbone for the main operation I had set to dispense before the arrival of the army of barbarians. I had been informed during the training with Altuas about the theoretical understanding of the mystical arts. He was teaching me that there was a high chance of shamans following the main force to help with the siege. Which is why, much to my initial displeasure, I couldn't make use of proper magecraft to set up some traps against the invading banner. Still, I wasn't even close to see any major issues from this development, as it proved that I had to focus myself into developing some hybrid technology that could best fit with the resources we had here in Londinium. The creation of makeshift mines was a process that was elaborated by some magus specializing in explosives, but to make it possible for those to not be detected, I had ordered for them to create a process that could work without the usage of magecraft itself. The presence of various people on this project ended up seeing the problem solved mere hours after its conception. The proper plans to prepare the explosives were given to the engineers assigned to create and set those mines in specific parts of the muddy paths that led to the fortress and in the forest sections nearby those. They were accompanied by a small detachment of hunters that were there to sign down on some maps the various locations of the mines that had been deployed so that the removal of those once the hostilities were over and our situation had stabilized. I couldn't just let Britain become Vietnam, even though I had a strong need to introduce Leroy Jenkins to the battle cries available to the soldiers. For now, I had managed to get Deus Vult down, getting quite the praise from Felicianus at the mentioning of such thing. But returning back to the subject about the mines, I have to make a clarification. The traps were meant to debilitate and reduce the morale within the enemy force, enough to make it possible for our numerically inferior army to smash in their ranks and crack their hopes of victory by sheer panic and surprise. Morale is the key of major victories, especially when our foes were the ones to be demoralized and drawn to a fickle resistance to our planned counterattack. And this is why soup kitchens were inherently important for this topic, as those would offer our soldiers some means of having a pleasant stay within the castle even after the war was over. Maybe even create the first professional army, since I was still controlling a bunch of half-trained militias that weren't supposed to wage war beyond the current circumstances. Yet the promise of reforms, of changes that would see them having to worry no longer over their means to rest or their needs of finding something good to eat, would surely see something change about it all. In conjunction to this, there was a revival of devotion of the divine figure of God. With the church being the direct responsible for feeding so many poor people, many were already starting to feel more attached to their faith in Christianity, and many were already dropping their doubts over reverting back to their pagan beliefs. It was the beginning of my reign and, while I would have wanted to do much more than this in my third day, I knew that risking too much of the treasury would be fatal for the kingdom's economy. We were working on some closed-circuited system that couldn't survive for long times, and a serious victory to give us the opportunity of securing back the nearby villages was a must. Once we were to reclaim control of those, the coin should start to roll far quicker than it is right now in its sluggish pace. Major reforms so suddenly would only shake the boat until it flips back around, killing its occupants in the process. I was preparing multiple plans that would have to be implemented gradually within my kingdom, and boy, I had some plans over what to do over it all with the beauty of what magecraft was. Despite the fact it wasn't full-fledged magic and restrained by the laws of nature, these mystical arts were still something that could easily help to speed up the pace of progress for humanity if handled correctly and with some careful approach. Heck, I wouldn't even dismiss the thoughts of bringing order in mainland Europe once things were properly stabilized in the British Isles, but that was already going to take a while with the various rulers, historical and mystical, still ruling in Scotland and Ireland. It was easy to imagine the potential and the limits of such advancement, but for now my attention was directed to the invading raiders than to what I could do after beating them. Which is why I had made sure to also start the construction of some proto-cannons to fix by the walls of the city to offer some artillery coverage for the approaching fight. It was time to amp up the tune of war and bring in some new instruments of the overture in the battlefield. Marcus was quite fascinated by what I had defined as the combination of a ballista's direct and precise firing and the firepower available only to a catapult, even asking to try out this new toy. There were some fires that needed to be dealt with in the last 12 hours, but I've to admit I've never seen someone so battle-hardened look as giddy as a child while shooting his newest weapon. With the army under Londinium's control almost doubling with the integration of the poor men that had decided to join for the glorious last stand to protect the land of God, I was quite sure that a victory against the invading force would be quick to achieve if there weren't any issues happening in the meantime. But of course, just like it was usual when people were prone to think about this simple sentence in their highest peak of success, something did have to happen to either foil their plan or to introduce something far worse than planned, and I'm quite unsure about what had happened back then. It all began by the end of lunch, and I could remember making my way right to my bedroom to change up with some clothes that best fitted with the training session I had planned to go through with Marcus. Altuos hadn't been present during the official lunch for important reasons, to which I merely didn't give too much weight about. He might be my advisor and closest supporter, but he was still the leader of an entire guild, and for that he had all the rights to take an absence to deal with whatever situation was going on with his group. Walking alone in the quiet halls of the castle, I was given some time to prepare for what was going to be another brutal session of trying to get the whole dodging gig going with 4 guys attacking me at the same time. That wasn't just realistic. Not even in Dark Soul, that was a skill that one could just learn, only luck and RNG playing best for that kind of shenanigans. Still, the commander firmly believed in my capacity of pulling that stuff off after some serious efforts, and I was quite sure that the real reason was to see me getting my ass handled easily by his own apprentices. They were good people that were meaning well with their help, but they weren't sparing me anything during the training sessions, not even a moment to recover from any unplanned trip face first to the floor. Groaning quietly at this very thought, I felt myself tensing up and stopping in my steps as I heard some growing noises starting to come right by the corner of this corridor. Just as I proceeded to take some cautious steps to try and see what was going on with the distinct sounds that seemed to have been taken by some magic fight from a movie, I saw a cloaked figure set flying towards the wall, only for a bubble-like blue barrier to form around his body and reducing the damage to a minimum. My eyes widened in shock as I recognized who was I looking at, dread surging as it seemed to be a clear attack to the castle. Altuos was lying his back on the cold ground as blood slowly pouring from his lips, but his half-focused eyes were directed at the responsible for such an attack. Why you will end not dash. Spare yourself the unnecessary breathing, Altuos, a suave feminine voice interceded smoothly. You know well enough that you can spare yourself this pain if you relinquish the tome detailing the summoning spell. Loud steps started to draw closer and soon my sight was over it. I saw a particularly tall behemoth cover my eyes with its large frame from seeing the owner of the heavenly voice that was responsible for the assault on the elder. The being was wearing a knight-like armor that had a helmet that perfectly covered their identity with how few openings there were on it. A shining white blade was on his right hand, while the other palm was busy holding a silver shield with a crow-like insignia onto it. Before I could have said anything about it, I noticed the armored figure now looking at me with utmost attention, taking a few steps towards me and prompting me to unsheath crochet moors in preparation for an attack. A quick hum originated from behind it. It would seem like we have an unexpected guest to our little reunion. I suppose we will have to first deal with him. As those words concluded, the knight-like titan rushed to the attack, its speed being far faster than any opponent I've faced just yet and, quite to a degree that I could say that it was truly something inhuman hiding behind helmet. It took a large swing with its sword, forcing me to jump over it as I approached it with immense caution. This wasn't just a spar that I could just back away from and I could already feel the difference by the first dodge. My breathing started to grow softer, my eyes narrowed on my target and the world seemed to turn in a blur as I plunged briefly the blade of my weapon right into its exposed lower thigh. It groaned in what I could perceive as pain, but it didn't seem deterred from trying to bash me away as he lifted the sword from its extended reach. I moved to the side, ducking away as it took another mighty swing in an effort to cleave me in half. There was something wrong about its maneuvering, something that just felt inorganic. Like a robot, but that couldn't just be it. I continued to think about it as I continued to dodge or deflect away the various attacks sent in my general direction, my attention mostly directed to the little openings popping in its stance as the deadly dance continued. I could listen some discussion still going in the background while I was fighting this monster. The woman that commanded my opponent was interacting with Altuos and the elder was rejecting any persuasions coming from the mysterious mastermind of this sudden and unexpected assault. But I couldn't just get a glance over where she was standing. The high-paced combat was drawing most of my focus on the still dangerous behemoth. It had just shrugged off the non-negligible wound on its chest even though it was still bleeding through its armor. No signs of relenting its aggressive pattern. I found myself lost in that swift loop and then I felt pain surge from my stomach, the armored fiend slamming a quick kick on it. It takes just a mistake for you to lose a fight, keenly. It was instantaneous, almost a blur, and I felt my eyes being forced wide open by the shock. I blurted spit and blood as that powerful and unexpected attack sent me flying onto the close wall, my back being unprepared for the new wave of pain rising from the impact. I fell on one knee at that brutal escalation, trembling and shivering at the fact I had lost so much blood so quickly, and I could feel that I was starting to hyperventilate at the presence of so much red staining the floor and my clothes, my sight even. This was my first battle and it was also going to be the last one. I felt the bile trying to rise up through my throat, but I was quick to send it back to my belly where it truly belonged. My sight was now directed at the approaching opponent, the giant having dropped its shield and now lifting his sword with all its might, ready to conclude the job once and for all. That seemed to be it. I thought that it was my last moment of what could have been my greatest opportunity that life had offered me. With my brain slowly shutting up as the blood was starting to get hold of my logical thoughts and drowning them to silence, I started to feel time slowing down to see the killing blow unfold silently and unopposed. But was that going to be it? Was I just going to surrender myself to this sudden assassination attempt that wasn't even directed at me to begin with? Can I actually afford to lose this fight with how high the bets are? What about the people believing in me to save them from the approaching invasion? C, can I just shatter their hope? CA, can I let them perish because I want to give up? I snarled at myself in a chiding manner for even considering just letting death take me away without a fight, my head burning fiercely, and I felt forced to stay away through the need of catch some rest as the fight wasn't over yet. One could say that I was trying some stupid thing, to fight the unavoidable, to fend off the blow that would effortlessly see me killed, but with the odds stacked against me and the knowledge that people were giving me their trust to see the bright light of another day. I felt an itching sensation coming from the hand holding crochet moors. The blade begging to continue, to not stop, to persist and win this battle against this weak bastard in front of me. I refused to let go of my kingdom. I proclaimed loudly, some lucidity still missing from my mind as I prepared to throw a useless swing at the incoming doom, my hands tightly holding at the sword's hilt as I forced it to move upward. Go forth, crochet moors. Now from there things start to get quite difficult to remember at this point. I think I saw my blade exploding in pure golden and scarlet light as it continued its ascension, cutting verily into the torso of the golem and shredding its inner bits apart. It was magical, it wasn't bloody, but I was certainly feeling energized by this explosion of new vigor rushing all over my body. It groaned, backing away in shock and pausing its attack as its arms flailed in agony at the sudden damage it had sustained, but I wasn't done yet. Not after what had just happened. I started to cut wildly, aimlessly, and mercilessly into its mechanic-looking innards, shredding into its metallic bits, spilling its strange-looking goo away from its chest, and after what felt to have been an eternity, I saw it fall backward on the floor to never get up again. I waited for a full minute, silence reigning over the corridor, and I sighed in relief at the lack of activity from the now broken giant. My posture was still tense after that last hit and my breathing was terribly labored after what had just happened here. My body was mostly torn by the experience, some of the pointy bits of the wall having cut some more wounds on my back when I crashed butt first into it. I was so clueless, so tired, and I was aware that it wasn't over yet. I glanced to the side as I was finally granted the chance of seeing the one responsible for this attack, and she was already staring at me. The woman was wearing a crown-like thing on top of her head, the upward spiky bits being made with dark-colored sapphires. She had a dark-tinted veil covering her face, so I could just see her pale blonde hair that reached far below her knees. Her dark dress with dull blue details was very revealing, with several spots showing parts of her skin that didn't truly display any nudity. Her midriff was exposed, some blood-red tattoo-like details developing near her belly button, before resuming right above her mostly exposed cleavage. It took me a moment to actually stare at the detail instead of getting allured by the infinity of certain valleys. Goddamn, is this what Giacomo Leopardi was alluding to about the infinite? I started to make my slow and incredibly pained way towards Altuo's and the mysterious woman, crochet moors trailing down on the ground as I didn't feel strong enough to rise it up in a proper guarding stance. While the super adrenaline had gotten me to survive the golem, I just couldn't keep up with another fight with the same pace, if not worse than the one I just left as the victor. So you are the one Altuos has summoned to lead this dying city? The pale blonde muttered with a hint of intrigue and fascination. To think that a mere human could have been able to survive an enforcer, one of my latest creations. Her musings continued even as I finally reached close enough to see the shocked look on the slightly injured elder. Altuos? I muttered weakly, towards the magus. Why, your majesty? He seemed still shocked, but managed a nod at my query. See, can you do the thing where you actually call for medical assistance? Confusion hindered him for a while, but ultimately the old man reached for the communication gem within one of his robe's pockets. Are you now really going to ignore me, false pretender? The woman resumed her verbal charge once again. Not only you rudely refuse to introduce yourself, but you also decide to pass me, the blood of Uther Pendragon and true Queen of Britain, off for wait, you are Morgan Le Fay? She eased a little, then she seemed to tense up again as she brought her right hand up, lifting just a few fingers. How many fingers are you seeing right now, you fool? The question broke a little from the past few sentences, but I decided to comply to this silly request. F4? The blonde shook her head. Of course. After fighting the enforcer, you are far too drained to even commit yourself to attack me. She took a few steps towards me and paused, her hand lifting my chin up so I could stare right into her veiled face instead of lingering onto her bosom. You are strong, I can tell you would become great under my rule, Morgan said with such a sensual and enticing tone, almost tickling my chin. But you would have to recognize me as I am sorry, I interjected with a simple whisper. While you might have some pretty eyes and quite the lovely smile, I have to refuse you your offer. She almost went to check if her veil was still on as I commented about her face, but of course I couldn't see anything through that little barrier. Why? I am Joseph, King of Britannia and ruler of the people that believes in me, I replied tiredly. And I don't want to dash. To hurt them? Morgan guessed with a bored tone, letting go of my chin and taking a step back. You were just like Arthur about this, but your response is genuine, it feels as such. Also, aren't you married already with a king? I asked almost as quickly as she replied. I think it was King Lot, right? I'm surprised you, a mere stranger, would know about this, the woman voiced her surprise and interest over my knowledge. I now wonder what else you know about the world around you. She giggled and then, a dark blue portal opened behind her. But I think this time I will let you live, little claimant, the blonde concluded with a sigh. Your tenacity will prove to be enough of an entertainment and I can only see you succeed against the fools trying to raise the isles. I blinked at her words and spoke up once again. Wait, I held my free arm towards her and she actually stopped to listen. Why did you attack Altuus then? She stared back with some silence at first, then she sighed. Why should I even tell you this, Joseph of Britannia? And with that rejection, I was left standing with quite the odd situation. Why, your majesty, are you sure that dash? Thud. Why, your majesty? The floor kindly accepted my body face first as I felt my last strength go away, leaving me to face the worst kind of exhaustion I had to ever suffer until now. Yep, today is truly a good day to kiss the floor while thinking about hills. It was early in the morning and I was still unsure about my difficult decision of actually standing in front of the main force that was supposed to defend Londinium. I was still aching, my body well covered in bandages that were mostly hidden by the armor I was donning over my normal clothes. Riding a horse was making things far worse than those should be while I was merely walking on my own. The animal was particularly calm, it was well behaved, but still giving some shakes as it patiently waited for my command to move around, and that was making my capacity to think even less than it was a few hours ago. I should have been a goner after falling into unconsciousness, mere instants after the sorceress had left that ruined hall of the castle. Despite winning that battle against that golem and surviving a discussion with Morgan Le Fay, the wounds I had sustained during the fight should have seen me dying for how much extensive those were. My recovery had been possible only thanks to the Magus Guild, the group having offered quality help in keeping my situation stable while the healers took care of my injuries. Some members of the church had been spectating the entire development too, keeping away from disrupting the intensive care I had been subjected to. A precautionary force in case of betrayal from the guild, as Felicianus had been quick to define when inquired about the matter. There was some tension between the two factions, but nothing truly erupted from just some insults thrown left and right while I continued to be unconscious. I was sleeping as the critical situation was being solved, my mind too tired and somewhat drained by the wrecked state of my body. I could remember some of the early pain that preceded my partial recovery, as the main operation was only meant to put me in a somewhat sufficient state to actively give orders for the soon-to-happen battle. I remember waking up about 2 hours after midnight and it was still dark. A few magi that were keeping watch over my bed were quick to give me a proper checkup, to see if the herbs and the spells used to speed up my healing were working without any worrisome drawback. Altuus had been summoned about 10 minutes after my awakening and he looked to have gained several decades with just a glance directed at me. He was immensely concerned if not worried about my conditions, kind of touching considering that I had yet to cope with the fact I didn't have anyone else to trust in those dark moments. Despite my newest role as a leader, I had forfeited the presence of my family and that was still stinging even now. After some brief words to see the current state of things, how everything had gone by as I had been stuck in that comatose state, I found myself embroiled in what I could describe as a divided house. For the first time since I had started my rule, both Altuos and Felicianus were quick to side on the fact that I had to stay within the castle as I was in no condition to even move away from the bed. The two elders were opposed by the stern front erected by Marcus, with the commander of the little army defending the city kept pressing on the fact that my presence was the element that would keep the numerically inferior forces from making sudden retreats during the incoming fight. I was silent for a good hour, letting both sides expose the boons of their different mindset while also undermining their opponents by highlighting the flaws of the opposite decision. It was all nice and instructive as each gave their own understanding of the situation while keeping a surprising civil tone for this circumstance. I was keen to listen all the fair points and the little odd bits about divine justice and morality that were sprouted here and there mostly by the bishop. In the end, much to the two old men, I had to accept the fact I couldn't just skip the duty I had in staying in front of the army. Morale was going to reduce drastically if I ended up to not be directly involved in the battle, with many of the soldiers taking it as a sign of betrayal whatever excuse brought to them. The news of my wounds had reached very few people, mostly those that worked and lived in the royal castle. I was still fine, to the eyes of the large majority, and I couldn't just skip my task now that the stakes were so high. I needed some help to start walking, even more support to wear the armor that I had been given by Marcus, and I can't even describe the nightmare-like process of getting onto the horse's saddle. In the end of what had been quite the complicated debate to face so early in the morning, I ended up riding that dark-furred horse that was quietly waiting for something to happen. There were other knights standing just a few meters behind where I was, their horses as calm as mine while we waited the arrival of the enemy forces. A mixed group of pikemen and archers were divided in two forces by each side, while the rest of the defending force had been split in two large brigades that were keeping watch within the forest sections in front of the city. While a well-planned charge of cavalry was going to prove devastating for the strained invaders that were making their way there, it wouldn't have been enough to shatter their ranks to an acceptable degree to grasp victory. This is why there were traps between the defensive positions and the steps to reach those, rendering the entire path a minefield for the incoming attackers. Once the damaged force arrived to make sight with my task force and I ordered the beginning of the frontal assault, the rest of the army was to convey and crash on the unsuspecting behind of the German invaders. I was incredibly uneasy, unfairly tired by the sore body that I was supposed to deal with and, with the fact that the silence was filling me with never-ending doubts over the success of this simple plan. It should work. Technically, this was the first time ever that the armies of this period experienced something like this rudimentary combined arms doctrine. Albeit not as balanced as it would have been for William of Normandy because of the lack of more preparation and numbers, the flexibility of the group under my command made it possible to counter any surprises that was now lurking in that force. I had asked to Altuas one last time before leaving the castle what were the chances of encountering some magic users in the enemy frontline, and he repeated for the umpteenth time that there was a non-negligible possibility, but one that saw the sorcerers chained and used as tools more than willing soldiers in their ranks. It was somewhat a positive discovery, since I was now aware that the morale of this worrying group was going to be the lowest once the traps were sprung. It didn't take too long for this to happen as, while the birds flying around were still chirping and the soft English breeze was keeping my body tense and irked, everyone was alarmed by the distinct noises of multiple explosions being set off. Some light started to appear from deeper in the foliage, urging everyone to muster up their guarded stances as the battle was soon to begin. I narrowed my eyes, trying to get a proper look of the approaching force, and I was surprised by what started to come out from the forest. When I had initially planned the amount of bombs that had to be commissioned, when I made a supposition of the numbers that I was about to truly face, I had completely taken off a very important variable from my difficult calculus. The mortality of the traps I ordered to set up. When one thinks of medieval times, they either imagine some people ripping off Roman-based armors and weapons or people donning rudimentary knightly equipment. Yet I had completely forgotten that I was facing a no-name barbaric tribe that was made by mercenaries with little protection to defend against the multitude of explosions they had set off in their early approach. I could count a dozen or two of survivors slowly making their way towards us, but only a handful looked to be battle-ready. I might have exaggerated. This simple and childish thought was the only summary I could get out from that troubled turmoil within my mind, my brain and stomach trying to make sense of the sheer brutality that were resulting from the traps, and some of the footed infantry was already giving up the content of their breakfast at the mutilated victims of the mines that were lying around the path. The remaining force was shell-shocked and terribly frightened, but their worry seemed to triple when they noticed the band of knights and militiamen waiting for them to get closer. They stopped, their leader seemingly looking as nervous as furious, while he continued to shout fiercely at the hooded figure that was standing beside him. While one of the man's hand was holding the battle axe by his right shoulder, the other one was pulling at the chain connected to the metallic collar around the slender figure's neck. A sorcerer. I took grasp of the horse's reins and pushed the animal to finally advance towards the survivors of the traps, the rest of the retinue following shortly after with a moderate pace. The more I got closer to the area where the group was trying to make their last stand, the more I could hear the annoying shouts of the surviving leader getting louder and louder. The figure was now shivering, visibly terrified by what was happening as they were dropped on the floor by a sudden slap, forcing their hood to move away and reveal quite the odd sight. While I could get behind the fact that magic existed in medieval ages, that there was truly a Morgan Le Fay and possibly a King Arthur, I certainly couldn't make head of the appearances of the newly revealed woman. Her robes were tattered, signs of violence presented by some bruises on her pale face that was just a hint or two darker than the pearly white hair she had. She was glancing away from her captor and staring in my direction in an unfocused stare. She had red eyes. I mustered some effort to keep myself from facepalming with how in pain I still was, but goddamn, this wasn't just something I could directly stomach without some massive questions. Odd hair and eye color was sign of something one could see in anime. It was rare to find fantasy titles with human beings having this kind of elements, but I've met nobody else sharing any strange feature compared to the average individual. Heck, even the barbarians looked like the standard mix of Vikings and tribal Germans with no peculiar oddity in their styles and appearances. I shook my head at the development, trying to return my attention to the battlefield, only noticing now that the chief of the tribal force had now lifted his battle axe well over his head and was preparing to kill the sorceress trying to crawl away from him. My breath itched at my throat, my frown stealing as I carefully yanked at the reins to have the horse increase its pace. A quick neigh preceded a sudden intensification of the animal's pace, and I felt trembling a little at the new speed, while my right hand removed crochet moors from its sheath. My rush was followed by the chorus of Deus Volts as the rest of the group behind me started to charge at the band of survivors. The rest of the invaders looked quite horrified by this predicament, turning tail and rushing back in the forest, only to freeze up as they noticed the two approaching forces coming from behind. They were surrounded by my army, ready to surrender or be slaughtered by the meat grinder, all except the leader that seemed to be more focused on the magician. Ignoring her confusing looks, I found myself debating why would the young woman not attack us if she was threatened to do so. Why wouldn't she do that if her life was put on the line? The horse rammed onto the mad-driven barbarian, forcing him away from concluding the downward arch, directed to the shivering white-haired lady. He yelped, a mix of pain and panic as he was slammed onto the ground, dropping the axe in the process. I proceeded to carefully slip down from the saddle and on the floor, crochet moors lowered and pointed at the recovering barbarian. Why you will regret attacking me. My father, is not here to compensate for your lacking performance, I interrupted sassily, the stress of my bandages urging me to take a less diplomatic approach. Surrender or die. And never. I will never allow you to . I didn't do anything to maim him, yet the leader was either too furious or too stupid to recognize the blade poised over him as he literally lunged into it. I tensed up at the scene, his eyes going wide at the cold realization of what he had just done, slowly crumbling to the floor once again. Why you be but he said that I was going to be king, . A sordid thud signaled the end of his life, my silent expression deafening my entire experience of my first kill. This wasn't a dummy, nor the golem I had obliterated yesterday. This was a human being. A scummy human being, but still alive. I slowly retracted the gold-and-silver sword out of his chest, letting his body fully fall on the floor as I turned my attention at the blood liquid staining the texture of crochet moors. It wasn't jam, it wasn't some special effect. This was blood, real blood. I felt my lungs aching a little bit, the attempt to hyperventilate at the sight and realization of what I've just done was starting to get me fairly uneasy, if not squeamish. The noise of men fighting left and right, with none of the knights loyal to me falling against the highly demoralized troops, was rendered bubbly and incomprehensible as I carefully felt my sight drawn back to the young sorceress now staring at me and holding her hands in a prayer. She was shivering, tears were rolling off her cheeks, and I was unsure what to do about her. She was dangerous, there was no reason to believe otherwise, yet she hadn't attacked the retinue, nor did she try to help her captors around with the ongoing battle. I blinked, my eyes lost in quite the glowing pair of red orbs. And then I sighed. I blame you for making me this sensible to women, Cousin John, I hope you are cursed with infinite paperwork. I think the little curse backfired, but I guess I should have been expecting to be forced to face some paperwork before the planned celebrations. Everyone, from the simple inhabitants within the city and the soldiers that took part in this not-so-glorious battle, were quick to chant victory over the horde of invaders that had been vanquished from ever threatening the peace of the city castle. Yay, no more oh right, there were still problems. While I had been glad myself of having achieved a victory, albeit one as empty as this one, I still just got some more time to think, plan and improve my fief to stand up to the other issues riddling the Isles. There was also a newer problematic debacle, created by the little choice I had to make as the battle drew to an end. The sorceress had been safely escorted to some secure quarters where she will be monitored for a week or two by the Magus Guild in the effort of getting some information out of her. While she had been just an unwilling participant of this brief conflict and I vouched for her harmlessness, her presence did more than just stir some nervousness from the people living in the castle. Felicianus was quite irritated, terribly confused and highly annoying in what had seemed to be an effort to do an appeal to reason. At this point, I'm not even sure if reason is still viable with the crap I'm supposed to deal with. Magic, anime-like girls, what's next? Gandalf? I almost snorted at the fact that Altuas did count as a Gandalf, but my brain was just so embroiled by the content of the various orders, edicts, and decrees that were there to be proclaimed now, that I had the victory I needed to levy some legitimacy over the villages located nearby Londinium. The process was going to be a slow one for sure, but now that I was free to move some troops around to free the path to the still isolated settlements, I was sure that success was now a matter of time. Recovery was a must, while expansion further in the unoccupied lands was going to be the prime objective for the first few years. If I wanted to avoid the issues of overpopulation that were soon going to plague the Isles, I needed to create more villages and cities to house the large number of people that was still fleeing from mainland Europe. I was close to fall asleep on that wooden chair, ready to get some nap going before dealing with the duties as a victorious king for the ceremony planned to happen by lunch. Was I irritated that I would have to give some speeches about what happened today, while also appearing to be as gleeful and happy as everyone else in Londinium? A little bit. But I guess it is more of a fear-induced complication than anything based on true annoyance. I still had to plan out how exactly should I get the remains of those that had died by the traps out from the forest's roads around the city. The bill sure was going to be a tall one from what I felt was going to be the number of dead people lingering there. Just as I prepared to take a nap on that sturdy chair I was resting by, my attention was caught by the distinct sound of someone knocking by the door. I glanced at it and sighed. "Come in." Altuos didn't wait for more as he opened the door, stepping inside before closing it behind himself. "Your Highness, I see that you are stressing yourself already despite the fact I had told you not to," the elder chided quietly as he proceeded to take several steps toward the desk, taking a seat by one of the free chairs in front of me. "I'm trying to keep some bad thoughts out," I hummed tiredly. "I'm not exactly finding complete relief by this victory dash. Death is an acceptable part of war," the old man muttered in return. "It's a sad element, but a necessary one, considering how trying these times are. I thought that there were going to be much more, yet I can't understand why there were so few remaining from that early ambush. Perhaps you have forgotten that we aren't facing a true nation, but a conglomerate of thieves, raiders, and other horrible criminals that have little in common in each other, but the sinful manner they go with their lives," Altuos pointed out with a sigh. "It wouldn't be difficult to see them split apart in not-so-friendly ways." I blinked at his words, leaning my back right to the chair as I pondered over his reasoning. The tribes had little cohesion between one another, and this wasn't certainly a coordinated invasion that had a central leadership and some trustworthy armies. It could be possible that they just broke apart the moment their leader decided to go through this march towards Londinium. The sureness in his voice while he died upon my blade was concerning. It sounded just too certain, as if he was aware that there had been more than a good chance of winning this battle without difficulties. But why? Why he had felt so sure about it despite the lack of numerical superiority that he had lost with this rushed advance. Maybe he got deceived by a doubtful mirror, the elder hummed while looking at my face, my expression morphing in one of surprise at his guess at my inner question. I admit it was a surprise when I first interviewed the frightened child, but she is truly an admirable individual. Truly? Quite so, Altuos confirmed with a nod. Not only she is unique with her peculiar nature of human and homunculus, but her propensity to use the third magic is dash. Hold up, homunculus? I interrupted with this swift inquiry, catching the old man off guard for a few moments. Like FMA's homunculus kind of stuff? Was I going to have to ask some moral background before continuing this conversation? I suppose the term is quite unusual, but I can assure you that her connection to the word is fairly limited if not offensive considering her complex humanity and rare predicament, the old man assured with a sigh. In fact, I think her only inhuman traits are her eyes, her hair, and her propensity over the heavens feel. Can you elaborate on this heavens? Feel? I asked with a confused tone. From a sense of disgust, I found myself facing an odd situation of innuendos. She did look pretty gorgeous when I first saw her, maybe a little malnourished, but there was no way he was alluding to that. The third magic, one of the known 5 originals and the most sought by many greedy men, Altuos pointed out with a tired sigh. The capacity to extend the life of a soul beyond the death of the body, to allow the perfect survival of such a vital part of one's life to achieve true immortality. Oh, that sounded less perverted and more worrying if I had to be honest. Seriously, why was this a thing, and why didn't the man that led the banner against Londinium didn't use her for that? While I was unsure over what he might have planned to do by lashing out at the sorceress, I wonder why he didn't just. She can't use it, of course, the old man continued with a hum. She hadn't been taught to make use of her magic. And I would say that her former captor failed to grasp such a simple detail. You got to be kidding me. You mean to tell me that he just missed the fact that she was not only limited to make use of that peculiar and highly limited magic, but he also failed to notice that she can't do spells? My sadness was turning in mocking pity at this point, the more I realized how much of an idiot the man I killed was. Still, did she tell you actually what is her name? I inquired with a hint of curiosity. I forgot to ask early on but Maya, the Magus leader, interrupted quietly. Her full designation was Mayasviel, but she prefers the name Maya to it. I blinked. Designation? She was still created by some disciples of the last magician of the third magic. Her and many more of her kin, the elder explained calmly. They call themselves Einsburn, after the place where the first homunculus was conceived. So they are not made by natural means. I mean, there is no daddy and mommy going for And no, Altuas interrupted with some red on his face at the blunt query. They receive skin, soul, and humanity via magic. Their growth varies between the various specimen, but from my understanding Maya was the only one to be allowed to have a regular lifespan. That means she isn't 3 or something like, right? I don't want to deal with the FBI for just moving her around for the guards to take her to her newest accommodations. Indeed. I would say she is 19 right now. That's pretty young to be enslaved by the tribes, I commented quietly. How exactly did she end up under their control? She has yet to tell us about this, Altuas admitted with some embarrassment. We avoided pressuring her too much as we feel like there is some trauma, a bad experience that got her to refuse to give out this kind of information. Yet she was happy enough to dispense this much information. I mused out loud, pondering over this little obstacle behind the full understanding of this individual. I suppose there is a reason behind this open acceptance of giving out this much about herself. The old man blinked, a small smile appearing on his face at my words, causing me to frown. What? I asked curtly, getting a nod from him. Maya has been asking about you, Your Highness, the elder replied quietly. More about your conditions. She mentioned about seeing some bandages over your armor, and she has mentioned having served as a temporary healer for her former lord's house. So she had experience in working in a castle? Probably she had been affiliated to some Latin fief that had survived the barbaric waves shattering Rome's control over Europe. Maybe that's where she was actually captured when the fief she lived in was taken over. And wait, what? I can understand the classic healer's worry, but why she asked about me if she knows I'm the king? Perhaps she was fascinated by your chivalrous mannerism, Altuas mirthfully proposed, snorting as I frowned at him. It would be quite deceiving for a maiden when she is treated so regally by a king. It was the only way possible? You could have asked for one from your retinue to help her back to the castle, to be treated as a good prisoner instead of a war one, he shot back quietly, drawing a huff from me. There is no other motivations other than doing the right thing, I said while trying to appear the calmest if not the most serious possible. Not that I was implying otherwise, Your Highness, but people can start quite the conversations about this curious topic. Maybe you should visit Maya's room to dismiss such claims. Wouldn't that intensify the chances of rumor spreading, Altuos? I probed with a frown right at the amused old man. Perhaps, he replied back with a sigh. Or maybe you will end up having someone else to talk to instead of bemoaning to someone like me. Was he trying to say that I was being too whiny? Was that sass I was feeling from the old man? But alas, I think we should focus on the speech you should deliver by lunch, Altuas said to switch the conversation to a newer topic. I assume that you have something to say, No. I assume it was the battle, and not the fact you have been wasting time with this new paperwork that was meant to be done tomorrow, Your Highness, he said with a mock hopeful voice, getting a tired groan out of me. I'm not good at speeches. I find myself opposing this false certainty, my lord, the elder pressed on. While I can provide you with some keywords to use to improvise, I wish for you to at least try to write down something for the next victory. I blinked at his words, kind of surprised at how much our relationship had turned into this friendly bantering. I shrugged. I will give it a try, hopefully, I will not achieve a second victory before dinner. My mind wouldn't handle that. While I do see the signs of a good monarch, I will refrain from consider you someone this much lucky with successes. Oh Altuos, you sassy old man with wizard powers. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kayashin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons: Ben Phillips, Yami Tancho, Kenny Nielsen, Harold Martinsons. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here until next time.